Have you ever wondered how life can change completely because of a single sound? An almost imperceptible, fragile sound that comes at the exact moment when someone is on the verge of losing their strength. This is how today's story begins, with a soldier walking alone after returning from the war, carrying marks on his chest that no one saw, only felt. He tried to resume his life, but the truth is that he still walked as if crossing an unknown field, full of memories that insisted on following in his footsteps. And in the midst of this silent loneliness, a shy moan from the bush tore through the air like an urgent cry for help. Stay with me until the end, because what you're going to discover now might surprise you. As this soldier watched the road ahead of him, his mind was still reviewing scenes he would like to forget. The war was over, but the battle within him seemed endless. Many veterans experience this, the feeling of being at home, but not feeling at home. Have you ever been there? That impression that the world has returned to normal, except for you. It was just in this instant of silent disorientation that the faint moan echoed again, so low that it seemed to mingle with the wind. It was impossible to ignore. Something in that sound awakened in him an old, familiar instinct, the same instinct that kept him alive on the worst nights of the conflict. Keywords like heartwarming stories, life transformation, and soldiers who have returned from war fit into this journey naturally, because it's exactly this kind of deep connection that begins to emerge when one wounded heart meets another. And as he approached the source of the sound, his chest tightened as if something was about to happen, something bigger than he himself could perceive. The path was covered with dry leaves, the evening light created long shadows, and each step increased the suspense. You know that feeling that something is about to change, but you don't know what. As he pushed away some branches, the soldier finally saw it. A small, dirty, trembling dog, with the lost look of someone who no longer believed in salvation. At that moment, it was not possible to know who was more injured, the animal on the ground, or the man who watched him. That's the power of true stories of overcoming. They show that even when we think there's no direction left, one life can cross ours and ignite a spark of hope. What you're going to see today isn't just a story about a rescued dog. It's about how the survivors of different battles end up meeting at the most unlikely moment. The soldier knelt slowly, as if he feared that any sudden movement would push that little being away. His fingers touched the icy ground, and he felt the weight of that choice. The war had taught him to make quick decisions, but none of them seemed as delicate as this one. It was as if, in that silent contact, something inside him began to break, or maybe start to rebuild. He took a deep breath, not knowing that, at that very second, his life was about to take a new turn, an unexpected turn. Before moving on, it is worth reflecting. How many times does an opportunity for transformation arise disguised as fragility? How many times have we ignored signs that could change everything? Stay with me, because the way this encounter unfolds reveals deep layers of this emotional journey. And what is about to happen will open the door to a moment that forever marked the life of this soldier, and of the little being he found on that road. As he watched that small body trembling, something inside him began to move as well, a mixture of compassion, fear, and a quiet acknowledgement that the scene said more about him than it did about the injured animal. It was as if fate had put the two there, face to face, to reveal that even the most unlikely encounters carry a purpose. And before he even touched the dog, the soldier felt something born inside him, perhaps the first glimmer of hope since he had returned from the war. Have you ever lived a moment like this, when life simply puts you in front of something that seems small, but hits you in an inexplicable way? If this subject makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what has touched you the most so far. Your vision can help others who are also looking for exciting and true stories of overcoming. And while you share your experience, take the opportunity to leave your like, not only because it strengthens the video, but because each like makes this message reach those who need to hear something like this today. A lot of people come here looking for a little peace, inspiration, connection. And when you interact, the algorithm understands that this content matters. It's almost like reaching out to someone in the dark. If you feel like this type of story speaks to your heart, consider subscribing to the channel. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach more people with this type of content that touches, inspires, and transforms. Each application is like a new step in this community that believes that real stories have the power to heal, to bring us closer, to open paths that we did not even imagine. And of course, stay with me, because what's about to happen between this soldier and that little dog will deepen this journey even further, revealing a bond that neither of them expected to find. The soldier took a deep breath, and for a moment, it seemed as if the world around him had stopped. That injured dog in front of him stirred up memories that he had been trying to bury since the day he set foot on American soil again. His name was Daniel, 34 years old, a man who one day believed that returning home would be the end of all nightmares. But in practice, that return marked only the beginning of a new battle, a silent battle, fought in the mind, in the body, and, above all, in the heart. Daniel had survived the war, but he carried invisible marks within him, those that no one can see, but that insist on throbbing day and night. Insomnia accompanied him like a faithful shadow. Flashes of the past appeared without warning, and the deep feeling of being out of place never diminished. He walked through the city, but he didn't feel part of it. He lived with people, but rarely allowed anyone to get close. It was as if he was still trapped on the battlefield, even though he was far from it. This internal struggle shaped every step he took. He tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, to smile, to talk, to act as if everything was fine, but within him the hidden truth was much more complex. The emotional impact of everything he experienced was still pulsating. Often, Daniel would find himself staring at the ceiling in the wee hours of the morning, wondering when his mind would stop revisiting moments he wished to forget. It was an emotional labyrinth from which he could find no way out. And yet, there he was, kneeling next to that wounded animal, feeling something different vibrate inside his chest, as if that unexpected encounter was the beginning of a new transformation, a change that he himself had not foreseen. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding Daniel's mindset at that moment is essential to understanding the strength of that moment. He grew up in a simple family, used to making quick decisions and being the kind of person who solves everything on his own. He always had that posture of someone who endures everything in silence, because that's how a man should be. But war dismantles any mask, any emotional armor. Upon returning, he realized that his own emotional backstage was in chaos. There was a conflict between what he showed on the outside and what was really going on inside him, and this duality consumed him day after day. It is curious how, sometimes, life puts before us something seemingly small to reveal great truths about who we really are. And that's what that dog represented at that moment, a living mirror of the wounds that Daniel was trying to hide. As he watched the animal, he felt a tremor in his chest that came not from fear, but from a kind of silent recognition. That scared, suspicious look was similar to his own when they tried to help him in the first months after his return. He saw himself there, fragile, disconnected, lost, and at the same time felt the unexpected responsibility to do something about it. Daniel did not plan to rescue anyone that day. He just wanted to walk to clear his mind. But life has these ironies. Sometimes it shows us that the greatest revelations come when we least expect it. The dog breathed short, painfully, and Daniel's heart followed every movement. An old sensation, almost forgotten, began to awaken, the instinct for protection. It was something he believed he had lost after seeing so many comrades fall, so many conflicts repeated, so many losses piling up. But here was that spark lit again, as if reminding him that there was still value in reaching out, even when the inner world seems to crumble. This unexpected connection moved him deeply, and not just because of the animal. It was the symbolic impact of that meeting, the silent message that seemed to whisper that no pain needs to be faced alone. Daniel felt the weight of the memories coming to the surface, but he also realized that that moment carried a real possibility of change. There was something almost spiritual about that scene, as if the universe was giving her a second chance to look at her own vulnerability with more humanity. He thought about how many times he tried to run away from his own feelings, trying to distract himself with empty routines, trying to mask what he really felt. The hidden truth is that he needed something or someone that would reconnect him with himself. And as unlikely as it seemed, that little injured dog was fulfilling that role. As he moved closer, Daniel felt his heartbeat change. He reached out his hand carefully, almost as if asking for permission, and the dog, though frightened, didn't pull away. It was as if both recognized the pain the other carried, and in that simple gesture, an invisible bridge began to form, a bridge between two survivors who, for completely different reasons, had been shattered by the world. And that fragile yet intense connection opened a new chapter in a journey that was only just beginning. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. When Daniel finally pushed aside the last branches and saw the small body lying on the damp earth, something inside him snapped, as if an already worn thread, strained by pain, had taken one weight too many. The dog trembled almost silently, as if trying to hold on but lacking even the strength to ask for help. The dog's weak breathing seemed to match the broken rhythm of the soldier's own heart. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, each lost in their own abyss. And in that dense silence, Daniel felt the hidden truth of that encounter. He hadn't found that dog. He'd found himself. The shock was immediate, almost physical. He'd seen enough pain in war, but there was something different here. That small, defenseless being stirred a deep, raw compassion, not pity, not logic, but visceral identification. It was strange, even unsettling, to realize that the dog's pain carried the same symbolic weight as his own. That tired, dull gaze was the exact reflection of how he felt during those insomniac nights, when sleeplessness wrapped around him like an invisible prison. It was strange, even disturbing, to see his own emotional rubble reflected in another. His approach was slow, almost ritualistic. Daniel bent his knees, feeling the cold ground under his hands, and leaned forward with care. With each movement, the dog flinched just enough to show fear, but lacked the strength to truly flee. This raw vulnerability exposed the inner turmoil the soldier had been battling. He was used to extreme situations, to split-second decisions, to hardening his heart against chaos. But here, in the small forest clearing, the rigid mindset he'd built to survive on the battlefield simply didn't work. It was impossible to erect any emotional walls in front of such a broken being. Now I want to go even deeper, because what was unfolding in that moment was bigger than a man meeting a dog. It was a silent revelation about how trauma shapes not just the body, but how we see the world. Daniel never imagined he'd be moved like this. He'd lost the ability to feel true empathy for a long time, not by choice, but by necessity. War demands you shut down parts of yourself, and when you return, no one teaches you how to turn them back on. But that tired gaze, that involuntary tremor, that effort to stay alive despite the pain, everything pierced the layers. Daniel thought he'd armored shut. There was something profoundly symbolic in that moment to survivors, each in their own way, fighting different but equally devastating battles. Their shared vulnerability created an emotional bridge Daniel wasn't sure he was ready to cross. As he reached out his hand, he noticed it was shaking, not from fear, but from emotional impact. It was as if that simple gesture to touch the dog reactivated buried memories, wounded comrades, impossible choices, nights when life hung in the balance of seconds. But here there were no weapons, no shouting soldiers, no explosions, only a man trying to offer comfort to a being barely able to lift its head. With every passing second, Daniel felt an almost invisible but powerful internal transformation. He breathed deeply, letting the moment fully move through him. That unexpected encounter was dismantling the walls he'd built around himself. And as uncomfortable as it was, there was also something freeing about it. It was as if that scene had cracked open a sliver of the darkness he'd carried. Since his last day of war, a small, fragile, but real opening. The dog closed its eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength to trust. Daniel noticed this and moved closer, whispering a soft, nearly inaudible word. It didn't matter what he said, what mattered was the intention. Something in the way that small creature breathed, in the way it clung to life despite its pain, made Daniel rethink his own choices, his own journey. He began to realize that perhaps the universe was showing him that healing doesn't always come from grand gestures, but from unexpected encounters that force us to look inward with greater honesty. This first contact didn't bring immediate answers, but it created space for important questions. Who was he in this moment? Who could he become? And why did this unlikely bond feel so necessary? These reflections mingled with the soft sound of the dog's breathing, creating a dense, meaningful atmosphere. Daniel didn't know exactly what to do next, but he felt with an almost painful clarity that he couldn't just turn and walk away. Something there called to him, something there needed him, and in a way he didn't yet understand, he needed that something too. Comment below, this makes sense to me. Daniel remained there for a few seconds that felt too long, torn between the urge to act and the fear still paralyzing him inside. It wasn't physical fear, he'd faced far greater dangers. This was emotional fear, deep and primal, the kind that arises when someone already broken fears breaking again. He knew, with uncomfortable clarity, that if he chose to help this dog, he'd be opening a door he'd spent months keeping shut, the door to connection, care, and vulnerability. And for someone carrying so many internal scars, that was far more terrifying than any battlefield. Yet it was impossible to ignore the scene before him. The animal trembled, struggled to breathe, and seemed seconds away from giving up. It was as if fate had placed before him a choice he'd been avoiding in every area of his life. Stop running. He took a deep breath, as if trying to convince himself this wouldn't affect him too deeply. But he knew it was a lie. He knew he was being touched in a way he hadn't expected. Traumatic memories flooded back, times he'd tried to save someone and failed. Moments when the weight of decisions collapsed onto his shoulders like crumbling walls. And that's exactly why this moment shook him so deeply. He feared failing again, feared emotional involvement, feared reliving that sense of powerlessness that still haunted him. But there was also something new, a timid spark of hope emerging through the internal chaos. The dog opened its eyes with difficulty and looked at him in a way that dismantled all resistance, not with an explicit plea for help, but with silent acknowledgement, almost as if saying, "If you don't give up on me now, I won't give up either." That gaze moved parts of Daniel's soul he thought were dormant. It was an emotional impact that opened space for a decision he never imagined making just minutes earlier. And here lies the hidden truth of that moment. Sometimes, life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It simply places before us what can transform us. With slow movements, he extended his arms. The dog flinched but didn't flee, and that was enough for Daniel to understand he had to try. Carefully, he placed one hand under the animal's fragile body, feeling its protruding bones, irregular breathing, and way too light to be healthy. That touch sent a wave of emotion surging through his chest, as if the physical contact also brushed against the hidden chapters of his own story. The dog let out a soft whimper, and Daniel closed his eyes for an instant, allowing it to move through him. He knew that from the moment he lifted the dog off the ground, nothing would ever be the same. That simple gesture would mark a turning point in his journey. Now I want to go even deeper. Because Daniel's decision wasn't just about saving an animal. It was about saving himself. He'd spent months avoiding any bond, trying to stay distant from anything that might stir emotions he no longer knew how to handle. But in that instant, as he lifted the dog into his arms and felt its weak breath against his chest, something shifted in his mindset. It was as if the defenses protecting him were also imprisoning him. As if, by gathering that wounded being into his arms, he was also gathering the part of himself that still believed in rebirth. It was a simple act on the outside, but filled with internal revelations. Hesitation still lingered. He feared he couldn't care for the animal, feared the dog wouldn't survive, feared carrying yet another pain on his shoulders. But for the first time in a long time, he chose to face his fear instead of retreating. And that said a lot about the transformation beginning to blossom within him. As he held the dog close to his chest, he felt a strange warmth, a blend of nervousness, compassion, and something very much like courage. He stood up slowly, cradling the dog firmly, shielding it from the cold wind blowing through the trees. Each step toward his home seemed to mark a step into a new chapter of his own story. As he walked, Daniel realized how deeply this moment was shaking everything he thought was fixed inside him. It was as if his mind was being pushed into a new kind of reflection, a re-examination of everything he'd been emotionally postponing. He felt this decision to help a defenseless being had greater impact than any recent choice he'd made. And in a way, it was as if he was finally allowing life to touch him again. The dog, despite its weakness, rested its head against his chest, and that drew a deep sigh from the soldier. It wasn't relief. It was recognition. To survivors walking together, not knowing exactly where this would lead. But aware that something had changed. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. The soldier realized that as he wrapped those small bandages around the dog's fragile body, something inside him was also beginning to mend almost imperceptibly. It wasn't just about cleaning wounds or treating cuts. It was about confronting a hidden truth he'd avoided for too long. As he tended to the dog's trembling paws, he felt a different kind of silence, not the heavy silence of pain, but the kind that signals transformation, even when a person isn't ready to acknowledge it yet. It was as if each simple gesture, changing water, stroking the dog's head, arranging a cloth on the floor for comfort, illumined dark corners of his own soul. There was something disarming in that silent exchange. The dog demanded no explanations, didn't ask him to be strong, and made no grand requests. It simply breathed near him, sometimes with difficulty, sometimes with a thread of strength that surprised him, and without realizing it, the soldier began watching the dog's every tiny improvement, as if it mirrored his own recovery journey. The dog's gaze seemed to say they were both trying to survive what they'd lived through, and that unexpected realization deeply affected his mindset, almost as if he were witnessing a revelation unfold before his eyes. In the first days, the soldier believed he was merely offering shelter, but as minutes turned into hours and hours into whole nights spent sitting beside the animal, he began to understand that carrying the dog home hadn't just been an act of compassion. It was a decision that opened an internal path he never imagined walking. Something within him was changing, a small crack in the emotional armor he'd built layer by layer to survive. And through that crack came a light he wasn't used to feeling. It's curious how, at certain life stages, we need something seemingly small to realize the size of the void we've been trying to ignore. The dog, with its weak and dependent body, forced the soldier to pay attention, to slow down, to reflect on the impact of his own choices, and to recognize that not all pain needs to be pushed to the bottom of the chest. Sometimes, facing it head-on is exactly what creates space to begin anew. And it was in that quiet coexistence that he began, little by little, to let go of the hardness he carried. At first, he resisted. He didn't want to admit he cared. There was an almost instinctive fear of getting too close, because memories of past losses still lingered like invisible scars that burned when touched. But the dog understood none of this. It knew nothing of trauma, inner battles, or painful memories. It only knew this man was now its source of safety, and in return, it offered something completely pure, the feeling that even when injured, it was still possible to trust. This exchange, so discreet, yet so powerful, began making space for an emotional change he hadn't anticipated. He started realizing that by dedicating time and care to the animal, something within him was also reorganizing itself. It was as if life were giving him a second chance, even though he hadn't asked for one. A new way to move forward, where each step required courage, but also brought a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. At night, when the world seemed quieter, he'd find himself reflecting on all this, trying to understand how such an unexpected meeting could have sparked such a deep transformation. The truth is, the journey of recovery rarely begins in grand moments. It's born in the smallest details, in unseen instants, in silent decisions that change everything without announcement. And as days passed, the soldier began seeing the dog not as a fragile being who needed him, but as a fellow traveler to wounded souls, learning, in the simplest way possible, that healing can be built through repeated small gestures. There's something deeply human in realizing that the path out of darkness doesn't always begin with big strides, but with presence, with someone or something that reminds you you're not alone, even when everything inside you says otherwise. And that's exactly the presence the dog offered, a silent yet firm bond that gently pulled the soldier away from the consuming thoughts that haunted him. With every progress the dog made, he saw his own reflection. With every steadier breath, he felt a piece of his own soul returning to place. And when he realized that, there was a mix of surprise and gratitude he couldn't express in words. Now I want to go even deeper, because this unexpected link between care and transformation reveals something essential about how we face our inner battles. When the soldier allowed himself to care even while afraid, he opened a door he'd kept locked for years. The door to the sensitivity he once thought dangerous, to the vulnerability he mistook for weakness, to the hope he believed he no longer deserved to touch. And by stepping through it even unknowingly, he began a journey that would completely transform how he saw life. If this part of the story touched you in some way, comment below. I'm on this journey too. The dog, who once seemed to exist only between pain and exhaustion, began awakening to life in an almost symbolic way, as if each timid movement whispered that hope still had room there. The soldier noticed it in the details. The short steps the animal dared to take around the house, the gaze that followed his movements as if seeking a reference, a security that hadn't existed anywhere before. And in that simple act of following his steps, something new began to form between them, something that changed not just the environment, but the meaning of those days. The soldier, once trapped in his own darkness, found himself speaking simple words almost unconsciously. Come here, it's okay. Let's take it slow. Phrases he hadn't been able to say to himself in a long time. And when these words slipped out, they carried a sincerity he didn't know he could still feel. The change didn't arrive like a sudden impact, but as a series of discrete revelations that accumulated over time. The soldier began to understand this bond hadn't formed by accident. It was built through coexistence, routine, and repeated gestures that once seemed empty but now held meaning. It was almost strange how the presence of such a fragile being could so strongly reorganize his mindset. He caught himself smiling shyly when the dog waited for him by the door, or when it lay beside him, seeking his body heat as if to say, I trust you. Such simple, profound gestures touched a hidden place he thought had been asleep forever. Slowly, the house began to change too. The once silent, heavy atmosphere took on a lighter tone, as if the entire space were expanding to welcome this new phase. It was as if that small animal had brought into his life a hidden truth. No heart stays closed forever. Sometimes it just takes a spark, a reason, an unexpected companion for inner walls to begin crumbling. And that realization left him restless, yet curious, because he knew something bigger was happening here. Something beyond merely caring for an injured animal. It was a silent but powerful transformation affecting not just his actions, but how he viewed his own future. Even so, there were moments when the soldier tried to resist, as if part of him still sought protection, creating emotional distance to avoid becoming too attached. But the dog completely ignored these attempts. It simply appeared, approached, nuzzled his hand, lay at his feet, followed him from room to room. And that constant presence dismantled any effort to keep his emotional armor intact. Behind this coexistence, something profound stirred. The soldier began to hear himself again, to notice emotions he'd suppressed. And this rediscovery unsettled him, because he hadn't expected to feel this way again. As their bond grew, he also began speaking more, not grand speeches or dramatic confessions, but spontaneous phrases, loose reflections, stories told without intent. As if he'd finally found a safe space where he could exist without justifying every gesture. The dog listened with that unique attentiveness animals have, offering no words but conveying everything, and that created an atmosphere so different from the harshness he was used to that the soldier found himself wanting to prolong each of these moments. It was as if he were relearning how to connect with the world in a way he'd forgotten. Sometimes he'd wonder when he'd last laughed, even discreetly. And it was precisely this kind of thought that showed the depth of the change occurring, because laughing wasn't just about finding something funny, it was about allowing himself to feel lightness again. To feel that life still held space for simple moments that unexpectedly warmed the heart. And the dog, with its calm presence, became a constant reminder that healing rarely happens with noise. It happens in daily life, in small decisions, in silent steps revealing what no one else sees. Now I want to go even deeper, because there's something fascinating about how bonds form when we least expect them. The soldier realized it wasn't just the dog that was reborn. He himself was accessing parts of his soul he'd left behind. It was as if, by caring for the animal's fragility, he was simultaneously touching his own and understanding they weren't something to be ashamed of. On the contrary, they were part of his journey, part of what made him human. And that perception opened space for a kind of closeness he hadn't experienced in a long time. A genuine connection. Without demands, without masks, without fear of judgment. This friendship didn't need grand declarations. It was enough to hear pause following him, to feel a gaze that said I'm here, to simply know someone depended on his care while offering unconditional companionship. That created an atmosphere of trust he never thought he'd experience again, a kind of emotional rebirth, where every gesture built a new chapter in their story. And no matter how much he tried to stay composed, the truth was that this coexistence was shaping the details of his life in ways he could never have predicted. If this passage resonated with you, comment below. This makes sense to me. The crisis started like so many others, silent, sudden, almost invisible to outsiders, but devastating within him. The soldier sat on the sofa, hands trembling, breath short, as his mind dragged him back to memories he'd tried to bury in the darkest corners of his consciousness. It was as if a door had swung open without warning, flooding him again with weight, sounds, and flashbacks he knew all too well. The world around him grew distant, foggy, as if he were both there and trapped in another dimension. And just then, something different happened. Before he could fully sink into that whirlpool, he heard slow, careful footsteps, almost imperceptible. Then he felt a soft touch. The dog rested its head on his lap, wordlessly saying, "I'm here." The gesture was so unexpected and precise that it broke something open within him, but not destructively. It broke like opening a window in an airless room. The soldier remained still for a few seconds, absorbing that simple yet powerful contact. His breath, once trapped, began slowly regulating. He ran his still trembling hand over the dog's fur and felt a real, solid presence anchoring him in the present. It wasn't just company, it was a kind of emotional anchor he never imagined receiving from a being who once could barely lift its head. There was something beyond logic here, something touching the deepest level of connection between two lives meeting at the edge of pain. That moment marked a turning point he didn't immediately recognize, but one that carried a hidden truth that would change everything. He wasn't just saving an injured dog, he was rediscovering his way back. The emotional impact was so intense that his thoughts reorganized, as if the dog's presence had temporarily pushed away the storm consuming him. And most astonishingly, the dog did nothing extraordinary, just stayed there, breathing slowly, radiating calm through its very existence. It was a simple scene, yet filled with a force hard to put into words. In that moment, the soldier understood that true transformation rarely comes from grand speeches or drastic decisions, but from small, silent gestures revealing a connection neither knew they needed. This was the kind of experience that leaves marks, not painful ones, but revelations that illuminate a dark stretch of the journey. He realized that crisis, however devastating, had been weathered differently this time. Something inside him began shifting direction, and that awareness opened an internal door he'd feared facing, because it required him to admit something important. He wasn't alone anymore. That simple realization carried immense weight. It was like acknowledging he'd found a new kind of strength, not from aggression, resistance, or control, but from the steady presence of a being offering companionship without asking for anything in return. As he touched the dog more firmly, he felt warmth, not just from the animal's body, but something symbolic, almost spiritual. It was as if life itself were saying, through this unlikely bond, that healing can arrive through the most unexpected paths. When he finally lifted his eyes, still moist, he saw how that moment had profoundly reorganized his mindset. He wasn't fighting his ghosts alone anymore. Now he had an ally, an anchor, a constant reminder that even the heaviest memories could be faced with more courage. When someone, even an animal, offered steady presence, now I want to go even deeper. Because this wasn't just an emotional scene, it was the beginning of an internal decision that changed his life's dynamic. From that day on, the soldier began observing himself with more intention, as if seeing for the first time the cracks that needed tending, not hiding. He noticed how the dog responded to his emotions, as if intuitively sensitive to his inner state. When he grew restless, the animal approached. When he withdrew, the dog waited, and that silent exchange became a safe space, a place where he could exist without judgment. It was impressive how, behind this coexistence, Every detail carried meaning. The soldier noticed his anxiety lessened when the dog was nearby. Nights grew less chaotic when the animal lay at the foot of his bed. Even the house seemed to breathe differently when they were together. All of this wove a web of connection that slowly rebuilt parts of him that had been dormant. Sometimes he'd look at the dog and realize this small being had accessed places no therapy, training, or conversation had reached before. Not because it was a magic solution, but because it offered something rare: presence, consistency, unconditional devotion. Through this transformation, the soldier understood the rescue wasn't one-sided. He realized he hadn't just found an animal to care for, he'd found someone who, in some way, was caring for him too. That revelation brought an emotion he struggled to name but recognized each time. The dog looked at him with calm eyes, as if saying that despite everything, they'd met at the exact moment they needed each other most. And that perception opened the door to the next chapter, one where their bond would grow even deeper, more symbolic, and more transformative. If this touched you in any way, write below. I'm on this journey too. As weeks passed, something began changing inside the soldier, almost imperceptibly at first, but deeply significant. It was as if each small gesture from the dog acted like a silent reorganization of his mind. Before, his days were confused, fragmented, as if time had no shape. Now there was minimal structure, created almost unintentionally. Waking because the dog nudged him with its nose, walking to the kitchen to prepare food for both, stepping outside so the animal could feel the wind, observe, explore. Simple actions that might seem trivial to others, but for him represented a huge transformation in mindset and how he faced each morning. It was as if the dog had introduced a new rhythm into his life, one that demanded neither haste nor total surrender. This daily presence created a curious feeling, the sense that he could learn to exist again. He noticed it when he woke earlier, when he pushed himself to walk a few extra minutes, when he finally made his bed again, something he hadn't done since returning from war. It was symbolic yet powerful. Each small decision fit into a larger mechanism, as if he were rebuilding an identity long trapped in the shadows of pain. Moreover, the simple fact of having someone, even a dog, waiting for him reignited a feeling he thought he'd lost, a sense of importance. He began understanding he wasn't insignificant, that his presence mattered, that his existence made a difference to this being now walking beside him through the house. And that revelation carried emotional weight he hadn't expected. It was a hidden truth revealed only when he looked into the dog's attentive eyes, always locked on his every move, as if saying, "You're still here, and that's enough." Most impressively, he surprised himself with his own behavior. He started talking more, not to people, but to the dog. He'd share small things from his day, vent without realizing it, sometimes just narrate what he was feeling, and somehow, it worked like internal reorganization. His words flowed without filters, without fear, without needing to appear strong. He allowed himself vulnerability in that relationship, and that vulnerability unexpectedly strengthened him, perhaps because, for the first time in a long while, he felt he wasn't being judged. It was just him, in his most human form, accepted by an animal that only knew how to love directly. With this deeper coexistence, confidence began returning like a small but stubborn flame. He caught himself thinking about tasks he hadn't imagined he could face again. Stepping onto the porch, getting the mail, walking to the neighborhood park. Simple activities for most, but for him, they were huge emotional achievements, almost rituals of rebirth. The dog, always by his side, walked with a naturalness that eased the weight of those decisions. And each step he took, each small victory, reinforced the feeling that he was learning to reclaim his life again. Now I want to go even deeper, because this phase hides a silent transformation not always immediately noticed. The soldier began realizing that by organizing the dog's routine, he was organizing his own internal chaos. He started preparing better meals because he wanted the dog to recover, and in the process, improved his own nutrition. He kept the house cleaner to prevent the dog from getting hurt again, and that became a way to clear his mind too, as if each tidy space opened room to breathe. Gradually, he allowed himself to return to activities he loved but had abandoned after trauma. He took out the guitar stored for years, dusted it off, and played a few notes while the dog watched with calm curiosity. For the first time since returning from war, he felt something resembling genuine pleasure, not explosive happiness, but something gentler, more real, like a memory being reawakened. He also noticed his body wasn't constantly tense anymore. The dog, lying on his chest or beside him, helped regulate his breathing, and that deeply impacted the anxiety that usually overwhelmed him. Most curiously, the soldier began viewing his own story from a different angle. He realized he wasn't just returning to normal, but building something new. This process wasn't about recovering the person he was before the war, but about connecting with a more conscious, sensitive, and present version of himself. And all of this happened thanks to a bond no one planned. It was as if life had stitched them together at precisely the right point in their journeys, a coincidence that felt destined. Even if he hadn't believed in fate initially, over time, even how he looked at himself in the mirror changed. He no longer saw only the marks, hardened features, or constant shadow of pain. He began noticing strength in his eyes, a renewed strength built day by day, gesture by gesture. And the dog, always attentive and near, seemed to silently witness each step of his transition. Emotional stability came slowly, like a breeze gaining strength. And with it came a discreet but powerful sense that he could believe in possibilities again. This part of the journey was essential in transforming the soldier into someone capable of looking forward with greater steadiness, and all of this paved the way for something even more intense. Next step, showing how this simple bond could reach even deeper layers of his life, revealing truths he never imagined facing. If this part moved you in any way, comment below. This makes sense to me. The coexistence between them began transforming not just the soldier, but also the small animal, who once could barely lift its head. The change was almost silent, happening in details, in unrecorded moments that carried enormous power. At first, the dog still walked slowly, as if each step negotiated between pain, fear, and the desire to move forward. But gradually, something within it began to awaken, as if that improbable bond had reignited a flame it didn't remember having. And that flame grew stronger each time the soldier approached without hurry, offered food without demands, or simply sat beside it on the floor wordlessly, just present. Slowly, the animal began showing signs of trust, barely noticeable at first, but deeply meaningful within this quiet journey. A longer gaze, a tail trembling slightly, breath calming when the soldier neared. It was as if, behind their bond, a hidden truth unfolded. A being so fragile, so broken by abandonment, was beginning to believe in someone again. This created immense impact, not just on the dog, but also on the man beside it, because seeing that transformation reignited his own capacity for hope. The animal, once curled up, now stretched more naturally, as if finally allowing its body to occupy space in the world. Each day it explored a bit more, sniffed new corners, ventured into small adventures once inaccessible. And in every advance lay a silent message. It was coming back to life. The soldier perceived this with a sensitivity he didn't know he had. Each movement of the animal functioned like an emotional mirror, its recovery reflecting the transformation the soldier himself was trying to build. It was astonishing to watch how the dog, despite not understanding words, seemed to respond to deep emotions, as if it could sense what the man tried to hide. And that exchange created a loyalty that needed no language, only constant decisions, closeness, and care. A loyalty born from their shared vulnerability, connecting different wounds that found relief in each other. With time, the dog began playing again, first timidly, with short movements, unsure if it could go further. Then with more courage, chasing anything that moved, as if each little run celebrated returning life. That animal, once lying on the ground trembling and unresponsive, now moved with energy, light in its eyes, vitality re-emerging from within. And the soldier watched it all with astonishment, as if witnessing a miracle unfold before him, without special effects or motivational speeches, just the simple power of a real bond. You could see the dog had developed a new sense of security. It approached the soldier freely, nuzzled his hand, lay beside him, and even curled around his feet when frightened. This behavior revealed more than affection. It showed it now believed safety existed beside this man. And simultaneously, the soldier realized he was offering something he doubted he could still give anyone: stability. That small, dependent being seemed to recognize in him a safe harbor. This revelation stirred deep layers of the soldier's mindset, showing that, even amid so many internal fractures, he could still positively impact another life. This silent exchange between them became, day by day, a kind of natural therapy working both ways. It wasn't planned, didn't follow rules or set goals, but it happened. The dog regained trust and expression, while the soldier recovered meaning in small routines that once felt empty. It was as if their healing unfolded together, creating a dynamic of transformation that relied not on words but on constant presence. And all of this built a new kind of energy, a discreet yet extremely powerful atmosphere of affection. Now I want to go even deeper, because this connection between two wounded beings reveals something many forget. When life places someone or something in our path, it's sometimes not about who needs saving but about who learns to love again through the process. Sometimes healing arrives in unexpected forms, with small steps, simple gestures, and ordinary moments, carrying hidden revelations that completely shift our perception of the journey. It's at this point the story gains even more intensity, because as the dog found strength to play and explore, the soldier unknowingly rediscovered how to live. And this exchange, this deep, silent bond, would still have unfolding consequences, revealing emotional layers between them that would become increasingly visible. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. Their story, which at first seemed just an unlikely meeting between a broken man and an injured dog, began gaining such profound meaning that neither fully grasped it in that moment. The soldier, who had reached the limits of his strength, came to realize that this small being he rescued wasn't just a companion in silent days, but a living reflection of his own internal struggle. And the dog, once barely able to raise its body, now walked beside him confidently, as if knowing this man's presence had changed the course of its existence. Both carried different scars, stories marked by pain, loss, inner battles, yet found in each other something neither had consciously sought: belonging. It's curious how, when we pay closer attention to life, we realize some connections aren't coincidental. There are encounters that act as turning points, as if reality itself aligns two souls who need to walk together for a while so they can face their ghosts less painfully. And that's exactly what happened between the soldier and the dog. Their coexistence became a rare kind of partnership where words weren't needed to express affection, safety, or gratitude. Silence, once so heavy for the soldier, now gained new meaning, a comfortable silence needing no explanations. The dog's presence helped the soldier see parts of himself he'd forgotten. Simple things like waking early and having a reason to get out of bed regained power. Routine stopped being automatic repetition and started holding meaning. Each morning, the soldier found the animal waiting for him with that sincere joy only dog owners know. And this created a silent but immense impact on his mindset, like life itself, reminding him that even in the darkest moments, reasons to go on still exist, however fragile. Those reasons supported something inside him that seemed on the verge of collapse. And simultaneously, the dog underwent its own deep transformation. The one who once trembled at the slightest sound now ran through the yard with almost contagious energy. Each step became a living testament that emotional wounds can also heal at their own pace, and that love, even when discreet, can rebuild what seemed lost. The soldier noticed nuances of this change in small details: how the dog no longer flinched at noises, how it sought him out to play, or how it rested with its head on his foot, secure, calm, fully present. It's at this point the story gains even greater depth, because it's no longer just about physical rescue. It's about two survivors finding strength while learning to trust each other. It's about the silent revelation that no one undergoes true transformation alone. And sometimes, what saves a life wears no hero's cape, delivers no inspirational speeches, and doesn't even understand the weight of the other's decisions. Sometimes, the Savior arrives on for pause with eyes that speak more than any human ever could. This unexpected connection redefined how the soldier saw the world. He, who once believed trapped in a cycle of pain, now experienced genuine moments of peace, however small. And it happened because every time he looked at the dog, he remembered he'd changed someone's destiny, and maybe, just maybe, he still deserved to change his own. That hidden truth, which took him so long to see, became clearer every day. The dog wasn't just a reminder of the past, but an emotional turning point pushing him toward a version of himself he thought he'd lost. The most beautiful part of this story is that neither had to be perfect for it to happen. They only needed to exist near each other. Behind this coexistence, life quietly rearranged everything. What seemed broken began fitting together in new ways. What seemed lost gained new meaning. The dog taught the soldier something no one else could. That there was still room to feel, to care, to allow vulnerability without believing it was weakness. And the soldier taught the dog that loyalty doesn't stem from fear but from affection. Now I want to go even deeper, because there's an emotional layer in this story many overlook. When two lives cross at the right moment, no matter how wounded, they form a bond that transcends logic. And that's exactly why this encounter transformed them so definitively. The soldier didn't just save the dog, he found a fragment of light that reignited something within him. And the dog didn't just survive, it discovered it could belong to someone again. It's a story about quiet rebirths, about small decisions that change